Okay, so if I said there's like one thing you could adopt, one approach to life that you could adopt that would change the broadest number of things we measure and to determine human flourishing. So, for example, if I said, okay, because sometimes I could say, well, there's this one thing that if you do it, you'll have a better marriage and deeper connected relationships. But it doesn't really affect other things. It just affects those two things. It affects the quality of your relationships. Well, that's one thing. But this thing, if you adopt it, it will affect all kinds of weird things like your mental health and your physical health, how long you'll live. But it'll also affect the depth of your relationships and how good of an employee you're going to be, how good of an employer you're going to be. It also, though, will affect how much money you make and how high your SAT, how high the grades you'll get in college are. That's a weird set of metrics that seem pretty diverse. And there's one thing you could adopt that would change all of it. And it's becomes like an obsession for me over the last since Ravi Zacharias.
And for those who aren't familiar with Ravi Zacharias, he was maybe the most prominent Christian apologist in the world, and then passed away. There was some kind of scandal swirling, and then it all came out. This guy was living a double life,
right?
And all kinds of sexual sin, immorality. It was horrendous.
Yeah, no, but not that he is. This is another chapter of this book, is that we're all that guy. It's just a matter of whether we're going to act on the enigma of man. But for the thing that is the behind all of that human flourishing, that really broad, unexpected range of metrics, is not like a lot of secular people think. It's maybe meditation or intentionality. No, it's actually humility. It's a weird thing that we've been studying for about 4 decades. And there's a lot of research on the advantages of humility. And you can kind of see why humility would give you an advantage in some of those areas. So for example, you can't teach people who aren't humble because they think they don't know the answer. So of course, any place in which teaching is occurring, like SAT scores are higher for people who are, even marriages. For example, there's a study, we teach this to couples in our marriage resiliency stuff, that they've done a study of people who are married 3 years or more. And this study was done on the East Coast, and they measured these marriages to see some are good and some are not so good. And they separated these, and they gave report cards to each spouse. And they said, I want you to rate your spouse and yourself. And some of the things that typically, statistically, contribute to good marriages, patience and forgiveness and things that you do well or don't do well. And I want you to rate yourself, give an A to D grade or A to an F grade, yourself and your spouse. And what they discovered is that people who rate their spouse higher than they rate themselves in all of these areas have the best marriages. People who are humble about their own, who they are relative to the other, flourish. This is true on almost everything you could engage. If you engage it with humility, you'll have more success. And those metrics will improve. Now, the reason why I bring it up is because so many of the crimes that I work, and there's a story in this book about a guy named Pallone, who the opposite of humility is in our culture is celebrity. It's pride, but it really, in that pride bucket of ways you could mess up by letting your pride get the best of you, celebrity is one of those. It's right in the center of that. And that's really part of what messed up all fallen leaders. It's almost always this issue of celebrity. And here's why. Of the 3 things that will cause you to fall and commit a sin, sex, money, and power, there are only 3. That pride, or all of it stands on the pedestal I call pride. So that's like if you had a gold medal of stupid, an Olympics of stupid, your medal round, your pedestal is called pride, and you have a gold medal, I think is the pursuit of power. But your silver and bronze are sex and money. Those are the 3 medalists in the Olympics of stupid. Well, it turns out celebrity is in that gold medal round. It's in that pursuit of power. And here's the problem. It's really hard not to scratch all 3 itches, especially if you start scratching one of them. You're better off. So when it comes to like pastors, for example, we will always protect them by saying, okay, we're going to put a Billy Graham rule. So we're going to make sure you don't get involved in some scandalous affair. And the elder board will do something to make sure we know how much money you're making. We're not going to put you in a position where you're going to chase money. We're going to monitor this in some way. Great. But almost no elder board protects their pastor from celebrity. As a matter of fact, they want their pastors to be famous and have a podcast and a YouTube channel and all this stuff, because that's how you're going to draw in more people to your church. But if you allow for celebrity, Well, it turns out that's typically going to come with some money, because you're going to get a chance to go speak it and now you've got celebrity and power and money. Well, now suddenly the sexual temptations that never would have been there if you didn't have power and money are now going to be presented to you, and you're going to say no to those. And so if you got somebody who otherwise on a surface level is not all that attractive, but finds themselves in a sexual scandal, it's probably because they have power and money. And that opened the door to the third thing. So we have to protect ourselves from the celebrity thing. It's a cancer, especially when right now there are no gatekeepers. So it used to be that there were gatekeepers. You know, if you wanted to be famous in my generation, you had to be on one of the 3 legacy networks. That's where fame was, or in one of these magazines or newspapers. But who gets on that? And by the way, if you're on the legacy media, it'd have to be like in the 8 o'clock or maybe the 9 o'clock hour. Because if you're in the 10 o'clock hour, you're not nearly as famous as a sitcom guy in the 8 o'clock hour. So there were gatekeepers. Well, there are no gatekeepers now. I mean, no one's watching legacy media. If you could be on one of the top shows on ABC, but you probably have more viewers on many of the YouTube channels than you have on that show. And who's gatekeeping that? No one's gatekeeping it. So this is why this issue of celebrity has become important for all of our kids, because it's available in a way that it was never available 2 generations ago.
And you ask young people today, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the majority of the answer is influencer. They want to be an influencer, which means fame, celebrity, and all that comes with it.
It's a pursuit. Influencers have the power to influence. So it's in that third category. So it's something we have to think about. And so if the opposite is humility, then the question becomes, well, how do you pursue humility? And it cannot be pursued. That's the problem.
And this is chapter 6 in your book, entitled, the book is entitled, The Truth in True Crime, What Investigating Death Teaches About the Meaning of Life. It's Jim's new book that just come out. That's chapter 6, Legends, Liars, and Liabilities. And I love all your subtitles. I like your chapter titles, but also the subtitles, I think, clarify. So how to moderate your celebrity. And then you also have another descriptive line, you were created to pursue humility.
Yes.
So that's very helpful, I think, in kind of framing what you're doing there. And this is exactly what you're talking about.
Well, and this is true for all of us, because we have a YouTube channel. So the question then becomes, well, how do I disconnect? How do I not let this become an issue of celebrity for me? That I'm now so enamored with my celebrity. And I think it's hard for those of us who are content creators, because we know that what makes your content even interesting to people is trusted authority. So if they trust your authority, but there's a fine line between trusted authority and celebrity. And for a lot of people, their celebrity is their trusted authority. That's why you see celebrity endorsements. Well, why should you care what this person thinks about this issue? Because they're a celebrity. Well, that gives you trusted authority. So it turns out that there's a fine line between these. And I've done my share of leveraging celebrity, because I've been on so many Datelines, and then I was in God's Not Dead too. I look back at that and I think, wow. So I just knew for several years now, and you and I have been talking about this, that if I'm going to see this as an important issue, I'm going to have to figure out a way to moderate it in my own life. I'm going to have to figure out a way to live this. It's hard for a couple of reasons. Mike Adams, our good friend who passed away a number of years ago, he used to tease that. He used to always say this. I mean, he said it so many times, and we laughed at it every time he said it. He would say, I'm writing a book, how to become humble in 10 easy steps, and how I made it in 8. and everyone would laugh about it, because, it's like, it shows the futility in trying to do it, because doing results in pride. And for example, if you said, I'm good at this, well, how do you know you're good at it? Well, I'm good compared to others. It's very divisive. Doing becomes, you see this in scripture. Oh, I'm so glad I'm not that dude. So that's the problem, I think, is you cannot pursue it, because the pursuit becomes prideful.
So then you're saying you shouldn't pursue becoming humble?
No. So you definitely have to engage it, but you cannot pursue it. And so Spurgeon says, humility is not something you pursue. It is simply the proper assessment of who you are before a holy God. So Isaiah doesn't pursue humility. He suddenly realizes it when he's sitting before God, and he's now realizing, oh, I'm a mess, because he's now got the comparative element. So who are we comparing ourselves? Because you could say I'm a good baseball player, but that's only in comparison to others.
Yeah.
Well, if God was a baseball player, I bet you he'd be better. So you can kind of, that's that, and that proper assessment of who you are. So now how do you consistently properly assess who you are? I'll guarantee you this. It's people in a marriage situation who properly assess who they are relative to their wives or their husbands, who have great marriages because they're like, man, I am lucky to have her because I don't think that much of myself.
Or lucky to have him. I mean,
or lucky to have him.
It could go
That's
both
right,
ways,
yes.
right?
But I think when I realized that, man,
each other.
And I can complain about a lot. By the way, you don't think the humilities are tied to gratitude? They're tied at the hip. Mm-hmm. There are no grateful people who aren't also humble. And if you're finding yourself struggling with gratitude, it's because you think you're owed something. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that so much of the life we want to live as Christians is connected to this issue of humility, to the point where, so I just don't know, and I think it's a constant check. We have to constantly check ourselves. It's not about, well, Lewis put it this way. He always says that humility is just thinking about yourself less, not thinking less about yourself. Or thinking. Yeah. That's how he would put it. I think he's wrong. Because Scripture says Paul says he's wrong.
Wait, let's get that documented here.
He thinks
Jim Wallace thinks C.S. Lewis is wrong.
I know, right? Well, he's saying that it is about thinking about. It is true that humility is about thinking about yourself less often, but it's also thinking about yourself less highly. We know that from Scripture because Paul tells us we're to think more highly of others than we are of ourselves. So Lewis has got part of it, but not all of it. You have to do both. You have to do, stop being so self-absorbed. But also stop thinking that you're the best person in the room. Mm-hmm. You have to think more highly. Now, how do you do that? I think that this is like anything else. I think it's principled. And I had a discussion with a colleague of ours recently about this, is that if love is a decision, could you decide to be desperately in love with your spouse? Could you just decide? Could you stop saying, I'd love him more if, and just get the if out of there? Could you decide, no, I'm deciding to love him more than I could love him any other way? Could you make that a decision? It seems to me there's an aspect of love that is a decision. And if it is, well, could you decide, could you embrace humility in a similar way? I think you probably could. But it'll be a constant struggle. So that's why I told you before we started, I don't do any of these things good in the book. I'm writing the book to me. Mm-hmm. I'm writing the book to say, hey, why am I still struggling with this? And I am. And I'm in my 60s. And I feel like, okay, it's time to, I tell cops this all the time. If you're in your 40s or your 30s, you offer something to an agency that you don't offer when you're a decade older. So when you're young, you're the strongest guy in the room. Probably. I mean, you work to be. Mm-hmm. And you're fast. You can chase guys down, and you don't get tired. If your FTO is 40, there's a difference between you and him. In your 20s, you can outrun him. By the time you're 40, you're already the slowest guy in the room. If you can't shift from physical prowess to wisdom, you got no value at all to your agency, because there's always going to be somebody who's faster now and stronger and can handle that bar fight better than you can. I remember when I was on training, we stopped a guy. We were it's a stolen vehicle. We're pursuing it. He wrecks the car. He jumps out and he runs. And I'm with the training officer. I'm like maybe the 4th month on the job. Off we go. This guy ended up being one of my best friends. So we're running after this guy. So his name is Bob, my training officer. And we jumped the first fence. We're right. I can still see him. I can see him jump the second fence. When we got to the second fence, I looked over at Bob. He's about 20 years older than me. And I said, this guy's getting away, huh? He said, yes, he is. because there was no way to jump another fence for him. And I'm not going to go alone. So you get it. If you can't move at some point toward wisdom. So I think humility is part of a wisdom element, right? So, like we have to have the wisdom to know that I am not the most important thing in the room.
Yeah. So I wonder if I'm just reflecting on what you're saying. I wonder if it's partly direct choice of choosing that thing, and also choosing other things that get you to that thing. So for instance, there is a sense where I could see the good of humility. Like, right, I read your book, I look at the studies, you look at these things and you're like, okay, gosh, that's very convincing. I want that. And however that would look, I want to pursue humility. Maybe it's just starting with my desire. But then there are other things, because we know that we don't have direct choice over everything.
Right.
So for instance, if you said, hey, I want you right now to believe that, there are pink elephants flying around this room.
Right.
I cannot choose to believe that.
Yes.
But there are things now. If you were able to show me, like, the evidence that there are pink elephants, and I was able to see, hey, here we have, whatever documentation, and over time, my study of that topic could maybe change my beliefs. I wonder if with humility, it's like that, where there is a kind of a direct path, or maybe a starting point, or whatever, a desiring, but then there are other things that you do directly that have this effect. So I'm thinking, okay, well, one thing that creates humility, and I think you've already mentioned this, is, all right, let me not just compare myself to other people. Okay, let me look to the standard of all things.
That's right.
That's God. And as I study his nature and character, I go, oh my gosh, here is God. Here I am.
Yeah, right.
Puts my life in proper perspective.
That's right.
And I wasn't pursuing humility per se. I was pursuing God, and then the result was, oh my gosh, I'm humble.
You're right. And I think so what I try to do in each chapter too is do this thing called chase the lead, where I'm trying to say, okay, so if you wanted this attribute, how would you get from where you are now to where you want to be? So I try to give you some ideas, and I think it is possible to act your way. You can feel your way into actions or act your way into feelings. And so I think you can do some of this. So for example, one of the things I try to do more now is, am I the kind of person who's comfortable celebrating others? Or am I somebody who just would stay quiet, even when somebody does something really good? Because I have a sense that if I celebrate them, I'm actually judging myself in a way that makes me feel less important. So I think just the act of just saying at every opportunity, celebrate somebody, celebrate others, you can start to move toward the things. Now, you could argue that actually makes me feel good, and that's for selfish reasons. I'm now celebrating others. So you can find a way
that's where
to mess with any of this.
So that's where you make the distinction between healthy self-interest and selfishness.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, even in the Great Commandment,
right?
Or the second Great Commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. So there's a proper self-interest.
Okay, so I would say this. I think when I hear that kind of language in Scripture, either from Jesus or from in the Old Testament,
or Paul in Philippians 2,
it's because he's saying, you are such a selfish pig. If you just loved others the way you love yourself, you selfish pig, we'd be okay. See, I hear it that way. Okay. Now I can be wrong about this, but I just think that of course he's going to look, I'm trying to get you to do something that's so against your fallen nature that I'm going to do the one thing you do well is you love yourself. So how about just loving somebody else, but you love yourself, you jerk? That's kind of how I hear it. Okay, so
that's the pessimistic Jesus.
That's the Jim Wallace translation.
That's the Jim Wallace
of the scriptures. But I think you're right though, that this is something that you have to make small. That's a good way of putting it. That you may not be able to. You may, instead of chasing this, here's what I do know. Because doing is so divisive and such a cancer to humility, trying to earn something. Here's what I do know for sure. No worldview advances this one attribute. The most singularly important attribute to human flourishing is humility. No worldview advances it. Think about it. If you're in a secular worldview, that is, you do the best you can to get what you earn. It's all meritocracy. So I do this, I'm going to get a degree. I do this, I should get the promotion. If I don't get the promotion, you skip me for that guy? He doesn't do anything. We see what we're doing? Any worldview that is about doing develops the opposite of celebrity. Opposite of humility. It develops pride.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because one of the distinctions that we'll often point to between Christianity and any other world religion is that this is grace-based.
Yes.
Everything else is
That's
works-based.
Right. So not just secular worldviews, and I don't care which worldview you do, it's true for all theistic and spiritual worldviews except for one. Mm-hmm. So every worldview advances the opposite of this, except for one that says, you know what? And Paul says, this is free. This is a free gift. You cannot earn the highest reward that this system offers. You cannot earn that. It's a free gift. Not of your doing, it says. Why? So that no one can boast. So I can take the pride out and develop humility. Now, it could just be that it's a coincidence that the one thing that would make you flourish at the highest level happens to be represented in one worldview. Or it could be that this is from the mind of God, who knows you, who designed you, and you were always created to pursue humility. That's how you're going to flourish, and this worldview actually encourages you to do it. So I do think there's some ways, but we have to, if you don't make an effort to do that, and here's what it does. As I started to study this, I started to become so sensitive to my own arrogance. Mm-hmm. If all you did was become sensitive to all the ways you're a knucklehead, you would be making steps, I think. And although I don't do any of these things well, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. So you have to aim at something. And so what we're trying to do here, I think, is to aim at these 15 things because they would make a difference. By the way, they are best represented in a Christian worldview. That's an odd, strange thing. And some of these are unpopular. When I did the video stuff for this, the chapters I wrote on marriage and on fatherhood were in some ways offensive to the people I was working with in the studio who are from a younger generation. Because this becomes single shaming. This becomes intolerant. This becomes, because even in the church, we've kind of purchased this idea, we bought it, that there's any way is fine. So there are some things that are more controversial here.
Yeah.
You know,